Hey, what's up everyone? Today I'm going to go over some of the steps that I use to do fall cleanup on a decandled Japanese black pine. All right, well, you can look back in the feed to see the video back in June that I created of the summer cutback of this tree. And really the main steps that you have to get going on and really synchronize with Japanese black pine is the summer decandling and pruning and the fall cleanup and needle thinning. You're going to be doing in the fall some bud thinning, some needle pulling, and basically sort of removing the old needles from the tree in order to create more space. This tree is about 15 years old from seed, and I have grown it in a container for pretty much that entire time. And so it's had a lot of attention paid to it. The branching as a result has turned out relatively well. But whenever you're doing an operation to a tree, you want to make sure that the technique you're using is really applicable to the tree that you're working on. So in this case, because there is now a reasonable amount of density here in the crown in terms of the foliage, we are actually running into the situation that needle pulling and foliage thinning is designed to correct, and that is that these buds and needles that are down in this area are being shaded out by the foliage that's above it. And the same thing is true for some of the interior growth here and down in here and here. So as you go from top to bottom, there's less available light for those needles, and so the fall thinning is really meant to balance out the vigor by allowing more light down into the lower portions and the interior portions of the tree. And each tree is a little bit different. If this was a tree that was really sparse, maybe a nursery tree that you would cut back heavily after purchasing it within the last couple of years, then the needle pulling process becomes not nearly as important as it is in a situation like what I have here. So always think about what you're doing, and you can still pull needles on a Japanese black pine even if it doesn't have a lot of density. Just remember that each time you pull a needle, you are removing a site where the tree can potentially send out new growth, because on black pines you get growth at the base of the buds in a whorl. That's basically the node point, and then there's a dormant set of buds inside each pair of needles. And so if you cut back past the bud point, decandling time in the summer, you can get what are called needle buds. And so you need to strategically think about keeping the needles that are on the tops of your branches usually if you're trying to compact a tree. That is the case for a lot of trees. It's not just the case for just rangy trees, but even in a situation like this where I have a lot of growth, there may be particular small branches here where I want to leave some needles to encourage back budding. As I go through this tree, I'm going to be looking at each branch, looking at the length of the branch compared to the overall composition, and determining if I have a good way to cut back in the future, even if I don't think that the branch is too long right now. All right, so right in close here so you guys can see kind of what I'm up to. I'm looking at some of the decandling sites. So this is the point at which the bud was cut in the summer, and then the resulting growth after it that happened in late summer. And the same thing over here. The decandling site is right down in there. This is the summer growth. So this summer growth is actually relatively long, which can end up being problematic for keeping your silhouette really compact, especially on small trees. One of the ways that we maintain a compact silhouette is by removing the longest of the summer shoots in any given situation. So this one has 3 buds, and I'll probably go ahead and remove this one because it's about a ½ an inch longer than the other 2 that are up here. Now in this situation, there are let's see, one long bud there, one kind of very small bud down here on the bottom, and then sort of a more normal sized bud right here. And then in addition to that, there's a couple of little teeny buds here. So this is likely a location where I decandled behind the node, and these are needle buds. In this sort of a situation, I'm probably gonna end up taking off this long one too, just to create a more compact structure, because I'm not looking to show this tree right now. This one's on the bottom, and for that reason, I'll probably end up taking it off as well. All right, so I've left these two buds for now, and I've pulled off some of the needles that are down, that were dangling down, to give it a cleaner look. I'll pull this one off as well. Anything that's long or discolored or dangling down off the branching, if you take that off, it will help kind of clean up the branching and give you a little bit better view into the actual twigs. All right, so up here on the top, there's some stuff going on that I can't really completely correct right now. I have to utilize the growth from next year in order to get this right. And part of this is just transitioning the tree from a young tree to an older tree. But you can see here that there is a small bud there and then two large buds here. This was decandled behind the node this past summer, but because it's on the top of the tree, these are very strong summer buds, a little bit stronger than I would have hoped for. But the solution to that basically is to leave them alone for now. And that includes leaving all of these needles that are along here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here again next summer and I'm going to decandle it back to just these few needles on each one of these buds. That's going to allow me to get another short sort of division of branching up here in this area of the tree that's really vigorous. So even though in the short term it might look better if I pull off all of these needles or if I cut these back, I can't do that if I really want to build a good structure up here in the crown. All right, well, I think that's about all I'm going to do for today, but let's go through and talk a little bit about some of the things I did and some of the things I didn't do. At each branch tip where there were more than two buds, for the most part, I have removed at least one of those or thinned it down to two. But I didn't do that up here in the crown. So there's not a really good structure up here yet, and so I want to leave myself as many options basically as possible up in the crown area. And that means that I don't want to just go through and make a decision yet on these. Now, if I were gonna let this run for a while, I might end up with knobs, but basically I'm gonna come back and do that thinning at the same time that I do decandling this coming summer. I've thinned out old needles, basically the needles that were from last year or years prior to that I've pulled off, except for in a few places where I think that I might need to get some back buds. The strategy for getting back budding is really not to rely on needles in a case like this, but to promote the growth from interior buds that we already have, like these guys, to eventually replace the outer growth. So if I want to replace this branch because it's a little bit too long, I would cut that branch off back to the base of this bud and move that bud down, or back to the base of these two and move that down, and count on that over the course of the next couple of years, replacing the foliage that's right here. And if I go to the back here, I actually went ahead and did that in a couple of cases in order to improve the branch structure and the taper of the branching. I removed a branch here and just sort of use the existing wire to move these guys to take the place. So that's thinning the tree and also enhancing the branch taper and the overall structure. Now, there are some places where I left really strong growth, particularly here on the back of the tree. The structure, I wasn't as careful earlier in my earlier years of dealing with this, and so when I went to actually rewire the tree over the summer, what I found was that a lot of the branching that was here was just kind of sticking straight up from various points down below. So I had to cut all of that off and then bend down branches that were sticking up in here to make this foliage and so on. And as a result, the structure here in the back is not quite as good as the structure that I have going in the front. So one example is this bud right here. This was not decandled over the summer either because I thought it was too weak, or because there were, not enough things and I was thinking I needed a branch extension. In any case, this really large bud is going to send out a huge amount of growth in the spring. And then what I'll do in order to compensate for the strength there is actually cut back down into either the needle buds that are here on this about 1.5 inch extension, or down to the proximate node, which is from this past spring. And at that point, that node will be the 2-year-old node, but it will still produce buds around the node pretty reliably, so I can cut all the way back down to here next summer. In order to accomplish the tight sort of budding pattern that I want, I have not removed all of these needles along these strong summer growth extensions up here in the top of the crown. And the reason for that is that as I come back to this tree next summer for decandling, I'm not going to decandle it here at the base of this bud, which would be the normal decandling point for an established tree. I'm going to decandle it way back in here to create tighter internodes and more budding that is more compact as a result of that operation. In order to prepare for that, I've left all of these needles up here in the crown. That will have an effect overall on the strength of the growth that's right below it, but the time where I need to be very precise about the amount of needles and the places that I cut is really next summer, or at any time during summer decandling. All right, thanks everyone. I hope you learned something from that, and we'll see you next time.